Come on, old man, you gonna beg or what? The cashier sneered, yanking the pizza box off the counter before the veteran could even reach for his wallet. Tom stood there, gripping his worn military jacket, swallowing the humiliation burning in his throat. The line behind him started to snicker. Someone muttered, "Freeloaders never quit, huh?" Tom lowered his head, ready to walk away empty-handed. But that's when a young delivery driver stepped forward and did something no one in that store expected. The crowd went silent. What happened next? It changed everything. Welcome to XQ Incredible Stories. Let's uncover what really happened. Jake never thought much about the faces he encountered on his pizza deliveries, but something about the man at the rundown apartment complex made him pause. Tom was sitting against a cracked brick wall, an old military jacket draped over his shoulders. His face was weathered, skin drawn tight over bone, his eyes distant as if locked in some faraway place that Jake would never reach. There was no sign of a sign, no cardboard asking for spare change, no blatant desperation. He just sat there, silent. Jake slowed his pace, eyes lingering on the man. He was supposed to keep moving, to finish his deliveries and collect the tips, but something tugged at him. He glanced down at the pizza box in his hands. A large pepperoni pizza, extra cheese, the kind of order that always tipped well. The kind of order that made his night just a little better. But this man, he was different. Without really thinking, Jake walked over, placing the box gently on the ground beside him. "I don't know if you want it," Jake said quietly, unsure of what to say. "But I can spare it." Tom didn't look up immediately. His fingers traced the frayed edges of his jacket, as if making sure it was still there. The silence stretched on for what felt like minutes. Finally, Tom lifted his eyes, meeting Jake's gaze. There was a sadness there, a weight in those eyes that seemed to reach right through him. Then, without a word, Tom nodded. "Thanks," he said, his voice rough, worn down by years of life on the streets. Jake didn't know why he did it. He wasn't a man to give away free food. He wasn't a man of grand gestures. But something about this man, this veteran, felt like a small decision he could make in a world that seemed so big and indifferent. As he turned to walk away, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just done something that would change everything. The next day, Jake couldn't stop thinking about Tom. There was something about that brief encounter that gnawed at him. It wasn't the hunger in Tom's eyes or the gruff voice that thanked him. It wasn't even the jacket, though it was worn and ragged. Jake could tell it had been a good one once. It was the silence that lingered between them, the way Tom accepted the pizza, not as a gift, but as something he was owed, even if he couldn't say it. There was history there. Jake could feel it. On his next shift, he decided to take a different route, hoping to run into Tom again. When he parked his car near the complex, he saw the man from yesterday sitting in the same spot. This time, Tom was fiddling with a small, worn-out dog tag chain around his neck. The edges of the tags were faded, the inscription nearly unreadable. Jake hesitated before walking over again. "Hey," Jake said, his voice hesitant. I didn't know if you wanted some more food today. I could grab something on my break." Tom looked up slowly, his eyes locking with Jake's for the briefest of moments before looking away. His face was unreadable. "I'm good," he replied, his voice quiet but firm. Jake stood there awkwardly, unsure what to do next. He wanted to ask more questions, to learn about the man behind the silent face. But there was something in Tom's demeanor that made it clear this wasn't a conversation he was ready for. Tom wasn't looking for sympathy. He wasn't looking for someone to feel sorry for him. He was just trying to survive. Jake finally nodded and turned to leave, but before he could take a step, Tom spoke again, his voice lower now, almost like a secret. "You ever seen something you can't forget?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, as Jake felt something stir deep inside him. Something told him this wasn't the last time their paths would cross. The following afternoon, Jake was just finishing up a long shift when he spotted Tom again. This time, the veteran was standing outside the building, leaning against a lamppost, the same military jacket draped loosely over his shoulders. Jake had intended to head home, but something pulled him back. His curiosity about Tom wasn't fading. It was growing stronger, as if something unspoken between them demanded attention. Tom caught sight of him as he approached, and there was no hesitation in his eyes this time. He nodded, the briefest acknowledgement, and then reached into his jacket. For a moment, Jake wondered if he was about to pull out something. Maybe a weapon, maybe nothing at all. But what Tom produced was far more unexpected. A crumpled, faded piece of paper. He held it out to Jake, who took it with a quiet, puzzled glance. "Thought you should have this," Tom said, his voice raspy but sincere. Jake unfolded the paper slowly. It was a simple note, written in sharp, neat handwriting, though the ink had bled slightly over time. The words were few, but heavy. "Thank you for seeing me." Jake was caught off guard. He had given Tom food, but never expected this kind of response. The gesture felt personal, like something Tom had thought about for longer than Jake could fathom. For a moment, Jake stood frozen, the weight of the note in his hands. "Hey, Jake started, unsure what to say. "You didn't have to. Tom cut him off, shaking his head. "Most people don't see what's in front of them." "Not really." His eyes met Jake's then, steady and clear. "You did." The words hit Jake harder than he expected. It wasn't just a thank you. It was something deeper, an acknowledgement of the unspoken connection between them. Jake felt a wave of warmth spread through him. It wasn't just a note, it was that in the smallest way he had done something that mattered. And for the first time in a long while, Jake felt like he understood. The days that followed felt different for Jake. He found himself looking for Tom on every delivery route, hoping for another moment, another conversation. But Tom seemed to slip further into the shadows, always just out of reach. Sometimes, Jake would catch a glimpse of him at the corner of the block, his figure a quiet silhouette against the faded cityscape. But Tom never made a move to approach. It was as if the brief interaction had been a flash of something real, something important, but now it was gone, like a secret locked away. Then, one evening, after delivering an order, Jake saw him again, this time sitting on the same bench where they had first spoken. Tom's head was lowered, hands folded in his lap. He didn't look up when Jake walked past, but something in the stillness of his posture felt different. The unspoken invitation was there again. Jake stopped in front of him, unsure whether to speak. The silence between them had become its own barrier. But there was a tension now, a weight that hadn't been there before. "I don't mean to pry," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't stop wondering what happened to you. I mean, you're not." He hesitated, trying to find the right words. "You're not just some guy who ended up on the streets. There's more to you. I can tell." Tom didn't move, didn't even acknowledge Jake's presence. For a long moment, the only sound was the rustle of the wind and the distant hum of the city. Then, very softly, Tom spoke. "I don't talk about it. Not to anyone." Jake's chest tightened at the words. He hadn't expected an answer at all, much less the confession that there was something buried so deep inside Tom that it couldn't come out, not even to a stranger who had offered him food. "You don't have to," Jake said, his voice almost tender. "But if you ever do, I'll listen." Tom raised his eyes to Jake's, the years of silence etched deeply into his gaze. And for the first time, Jake saw the faintest glimmer of something: trust. The next few days passed in a blur of routine for Jake, but the silence between him and Tom lingered, heavy and unyielding. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something important he wasn't seeing, something he should have understood by now. Tom's silence, his reluctance to share anything about his past, it was all starting to feel like a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit. Jake found himself returning to the same apartment complex on more than one occasion, though he tried not to be obvious about it. He would pull up, grab his deliveries, and tell himself he wasn't looking for Tom. But every time he did, his eyes inevitably scanned the area for the familiar figure. Every corner, every alley felt like a hidden clue he hadn't yet deciphered. One evening, as he walked past the familiar bench, he saw something that made his heart race. A group of young men, dressed in plain clothes, were gathered around Tom. They weren't bothering him, but their presence was unsettling. There was a quiet conversation going on, low voices, hurried glances, the kind of energy that didn't belong in a place like this. Jake froze. He felt the pull of instinct, the desire to intervene, but something held him back. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he didn't want to intrude. He leaned against a nearby car, trying to make sense of the situation. Then, one of the men said something that made Jake's stomach tighten. He's not the same anymore. He keeps talking about something from before. Doesn't make sense. Jake strained to hear the rest, but the words blurred together as the men began to disperse. Tom remained where he was, unmoving, like he hadn't heard the conversation at all. Jake's pulse quickened as he watched the men leave. He felt the pull of something he couldn't explain, a need to know more. But the questions only piled up, and Tom's silence felt more like a wall, unbreachable. Jake had crossed the line. He had offered help, but now he had no idea what he had truly walked into. Jake had barely begun his shift when he saw him again. Tom, standing by the entrance to the building, his posture unchanged, the same military jacket hanging from his shoulders. But this time there was something different in the air, a quiet urgency, as if something had shifted in the space between them. Jake hesitated, taking a few extra moments to adjust the delivery bag on his shoulder. He wasn't sure why, but he felt a strange pull to approach. He wasn't just delivering pizza now. He was waiting for a conversation. And the moment he stepped closer, he knew it wasn't going to be the same. Tom didn't make a move to speak, but his eyes followed Jake closely, as if he'd been waiting for him all along. The street was eerily silent, the usual hustle of traffic and chatter somehow absent, like the world had slowed down just for them. "Hey," Jake said, trying to sound casual, though his voice carried an unfamiliar edge. "You doing all right?" It felt like a simple question, but it carried more weight than he realized. Tom didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out something small and metallic. For a moment, Jake couldn't quite make it out. But then Tom opened his hand, revealing a tarnished military dog tag. The same one Jake had seen yesterday. This time, it looked more worn, more significant. "Why do you care?" Tom asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. It wasn't an accusation, but it carried the weight of a question he had asked himself for years. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure why, but the question hit him hard. Why did he care? He didn't know this man. And yet, everything inside him screamed that there was more to Tom than just the weathered figure on the street. "I don't know," Jake said finally, his voice softer. "I just think I should." Tom's eyes flickered for the briefest moment, something like recognition or maybe relief. But before Jake could say anything more, Tom turned and disappeared down the alleyway, leaving Jake standing in the middle of the street, his mind racing with more questions than ever. Jake had just finished another long shift when his phone rang, its shrill sound cutting through the quiet of his apartment. He checked the screen, an unknown number. Normally, he wouldn't pick up, but something about the timing, something about the quiet restlessness that had settled over him all evening, made him answer. "Hello." There was silence on the other end, just the faintest breathing, steady and almost too calm. Jake waited, tapping his foot, feeling the sudden weight of the moment. "Keep your eyes open," the voice finally said. It was low, distorted, almost mechanical in tone. Jake's stomach clenched. He leaned in closer to the phone. "Who is this?" he demanded, his voice sharper now. "Why are you calling me?" The line went dead with a click, leaving only the lingering hum of the call's end. Jake stared at the screen, his heart pounding in his chest. The message was clear, but its meaning wasn't. Keep your eyes open? What the hell did that even mean? His mind raced back to Tom, to the strange sense that something was off. The secrecy, the way Tom had shut down every question, the way he had always been so careful. Jake had thought it was just the guarded nature of someone who had been through too much. But now, it felt like there was something much bigger, something that involved more than just a lonely man on the streets. He stared at the phone in his hand. His finger hovered over the screen as if it could somehow give him answers. But there was nothing, no explanation, just that chilling message. A sudden knock at the door startled him. Jake dropped the phone, his pulse racing. Who could be knocking at this hour? He opened the door cautiously, but found no one. The hallway was empty, just the sound of the building's old pipes groaning in the distance. Jake stepped back inside, confused and unsettled. The call, the message, the strange pull toward Tom. It all felt connected now, a thread unraveling, and he wasn't sure he wanted to follow it anymore. But deep down, he knew he was already too far in. Jake's shift had dragged on longer than expected. The streets felt empty as he navigated the familiar routes, the usual hum of the city muted in the quiet of the night. As he approached the same rundown complex where he'd last seen Tom, something in his gut tightened. He hadn't planned to return, but the call still echoed in his mind. Keep your eyes open. It felt like a warning, like he was being drawn into something far bigger than pizza deliveries and casual encounters. He parked his car, glanced around, and noticed the flickering light from Tom's usual spot. The man was sitting there again, his back hunched against the wall. This time, though, there was no casual stance. Tom looked rigid, like he was bracing for something. Jake's heart raced as he grabbed the pizza from the back seat, the large box seeming insignificant in comparison to the tension mounting in the air. Tom didn't look up when Jake approached, his gaze locked somewhere in the distance. Jake paused, unsure what to say. Was he welcome? Or had he become too entangled in something he shouldn't be? Tom, Jake said, his voice carrying a quiet uncertainty. Tom's eyes shifted slowly, meeting Jake's for a split second before quickly looking away. He was silent for a moment before speaking, his voice hoarse but tinged with urgency. You shouldn't be here. The word struck Jake harder than he expected. He'd felt the weight of Tom's silence before, but now it felt like a wall between them. I just brought you some food, Jake said, offering the pizza, his voice trailing off. He wasn't sure if it was still the right thing to do. Tom's hand twitched, but he didn't take the pizza. Instead, he stood up abruptly, his body stiff with tension. They're coming, he muttered. You need to go. Now. Before Jake could ask who they were, the sound of distant footsteps echoed down the alley. Tom's eyes were wide now, and his hand grasped Jake's wrist with surprising force. Get out of here now, he urged, the panic evident in his voice. Jake's heart pounded as he turned and ran, the weight of the moment settling in his chest. Whatever was coming, whatever Tom was hiding, it was far too late to turn back. Jake didn't stop running until he reached his car, heart hammering in his chest. The alley behind him was swallowed by darkness, but the echo of Tom's urgent warning clung to him like a shadow. Get out of here now. The words spun in his head, but he didn't know why they felt so dangerous, why they made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He slammed the car door shut, hands trembling as he fumbled for the keys. But just as he started the engine, the headlights caught movement in the rearview mirror, figures standing at the entrance of the alley. 4 men, their faces obscured by shadows, but their posture told him everything he needed to know. They weren't just casual pedestrians. These men had purpose. They were waiting, watching. Jake's breath caught in his throat. The tightness in his chest deepened. He wasn't sure if they were after him or if it was something else. Tom had warned him, they're coming. The men didn't move, not yet, but Jake could feel the weight of their presence. His instincts screamed at him to drive away, to leave the city and never come back. But something else, a deeper need, held him there, staring back at those figures in the mirror. He had to know what this was about, what Tom was involved in, what the hell was going on. He glanced down at his phone, half expecting to see another cryptic call or message. But there was nothing. The silence was suffocating. Before he could react, the first figure took a step forward, and Jake's pulse quickened. They were coming for him, or for something. He didn't know what Tom had gotten himself into, but now it was clear. The storm was here, and there was no turning back. Jake shifted the car into reverse and floored the gas, the tires screeching as he shot out of the parking lot. The figures in his rearview mirror grew smaller, but the tightness in his chest only intensified. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Whatever had begun, whatever Tom was running from, it was coming for him now. Jake barely made it home before the pounding on his front door came. His heart skipped a beat as he froze, hands still on the doorknob, unsure if he should open it or bolt. The knock was firm, measured, too deliberate to be anyone from the neighborhood. He peered through the peephole, but saw nothing. The hallway outside his apartment was empty, eerily quiet. Another knock, louder this time. Swallowing his fear, Jake opened the door crack. His breath caught when he saw who was standing there. A man in a dark suit, his jaw tight, eyes sharp and calculating. He looked every bit the part of someone who wasn't here for casual conversation. You Jake Michaels? The man asked, his voice flat, professional. Jake nodded, though his pulse was hammering in his ears. Yeah, that's me. Can I help you? The man didn't answer right away. Instead, his gaze shifted past Jake, scanning the small apartment as if evaluating every inch. After a moment, he returned his focus to Jake, a subtle intensity in his eyes. I'm Sergeant Cole, the man said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. I need to ask you about a recent interaction you had with a certain individual, a veteran named Tom Grady. The mention of Tom's name sent a jolt through Jake, his breath catching. What's this about? I don't know what. Don't lie. Cole interrupted, his tone hardening. We know you've been in contact with him, and I suggest you stop pretending you don't know what's going on. Jake felt his stomach drop. Every instinct told him to shut the door, to deny everything, but the words stuck in his throat. The look on Cole's face told him this wasn't just a question. It was an order, and refusal could have consequences far bigger than anything he understood. You've put yourself in a very delicate position, Mr. Michaels. Cole continued, his voice colder now. You need to start thinking very carefully about who you're associating with. Jake's hand hovered over the door, knowing that no matter how much he wanted to close it, something told him this wasn't over. And whatever it was just beginning. Jake didn't sleep that night. The conversation with Sergeant Cole replayed in his mind over and over, each word more unsettling than the last. He kept wondering why the man had come for him. What had he gotten himself involved in by offering a meal to Tom? It felt like the pieces of a much larger puzzle, one Jake wasn't sure he was equipped to solve. But he knew one thing for certain. He had to learn more. By morning, the weight of the situation had pressed down on him so hard that he couldn't sit idle anymore. He needed answers. He needed to understand why Tom had been so secretive and why these men were watching him. But Jake also felt the growing anxiety in his chest. There was no going back from this. He grabbed his phone, scrolling through the recent contacts. He had to call Tom. Maybe it wasn't too late to figure this out, to get the truth. He dialed the number he had never used before, his thumb hesitating over the green icon before pressing it. The phone rang, and Jake's heart began to pound. He wasn't sure what he expected, but what he didn't expect was the immediate answer. Jake, Tom's voice came through, low and strained. Tom, it's me. They came to my door. Those men. What is going on? Jake's words rushed out, the urgency clear in his voice. Tom was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, it was barely above a whisper, his voice full of unspoken weight. I shouldn't have let you get involved. I never wanted you to get pulled into this. Jake leaned against the wall, feeling the panic rise in his throat. What are you talking about? What's happening? I'm not just some homeless guy, Jake, Tom said, his voice cracked with emotion. I was a soldier, and the things I've seen, the things I've done, they've never let me go. They're still out there, watching, waiting. Jake's stomach dropped as the pieces began to fall into place. Tom wasn't just hiding from the past. He was running from it. And whatever it was coming for him now. And, in some twisted way, it was coming for Jake, too. Jake didn't know how much time had passed since his conversation with Tom, but it felt like the ground beneath him had shifted. He thought that by giving Tom a simple meal, he was doing something kind, something that would make him feel better about the world. Instead, he had unwittingly walked into something dangerous, something far beyond the quiet streets of Brooklyn. Tom's words echoed in his mind. They're still out there, watching, waiting. Jake's blood ran cold as the reality of the situation settled in. He wasn't just a bystander anymore. He was part of this. Whether he liked it or not, he was being pulled into Tom's world, the one he had been running from for so long. His phone rang again, breaking through the haze of his thoughts. It was Tom. Jake. Tom's voice was frantic. Get out. Now. They know. Jake's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean they know? Who knows? They know you're involved. They're coming for you, too. It's too late to hide. You have to leave. Now. Jake's breath caught in his throat. The seriousness in Tom's voice made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He didn't have time to think. Everything had already spiraled out of control. He grabbed his jacket, rushed to the door, and locked it behind him. As he stepped into the hallway, the familiar feeling of danger washed over him. He wasn't sure what he was running from, but he could feel it. Something was closing in. It was like a storm on the horizon, ready to swallow everything whole. The pounding of his feet against the pavement was the only sound as he ran. But Jake's mind raced with more questions than answers. Who were these men? Why had Tom been so adamant about staying hidden? And why had Jake been dragged into this mess? As Jake turned the corner, he saw them. The same figures from the alley. 4 men, moving with precision, their eyes scanning the streets, their presence cold and determined. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he pushed himself harder, faster. He couldn't outrun them. Not for long. Jake's legs burned as he pushed through the streets, the pounding of his footsteps in sync with the frantic rhythm of his heartbeat. The men were close now. He could feel them, hear their footsteps echoing behind him. He had no plan, no destination, just the need to keep moving, to outrun the shadow that had settled over him. But the faster he ran, the more trapped he felt. There was no way to escape this. Tom had warned him. He had tried to protect him, but now it was too late. The chase was on, and Jake had been dragged into a world that wasn't his to understand. He turned a corner and stumbled, his vision blurry with exhaustion and panic. He needed a place to hide, a way to shake them off, but the city felt like a maze, all the familiar corners and alleys suddenly unfamiliar, unsafe. He could hear them getting closer. Just when Jake thought he couldn't go any further, a figure stepped out from the shadows ahead. It was Tom. His face was hard, set with a determination that sent a chill down Jake's spine. His eyes met Jake's, and for a moment, everything else faded away. "They're not here for me," Tom said, his voice low but firm. "They're here for you. They think I dragged you into this mess. I never wanted you involved." Jake's breath hitched as the gravity of the situation sunk in. The men weren't just chasing them. They were hunting Jake. He had been caught in the wake of Tom's past, a past he didn't understand, a past he didn't want to know. Tom stepped closer, his posture tense. "You need to go. I'll draw them away." Jake shook his head, the words almost choking him. "No, I'm not leaving you. Not like this." Tom's eyes softened for a moment, the weight of years of regret passing between them. "This is my fight, not yours. But I won't let them take you." In that instant, Jake understood. Loyalty wasn't just about blood or promises. It was about standing by someone, no matter the cost. And now, despite everything, he wasn't about to walk away. He would stand by Tom, even if it meant facing whatever was coming next together. Tom's gaze held Jake's for a moment longer, as if weighing the decision to drag him into the chaos or let him go. But then, without another word, Tom turned and started walking away, disappearing into the shadows of the alley. Jake hesitated only a second before following him, heart racing, adrenaline surging through his veins. They didn't speak as they moved through the winding streets, the weight of the situation pressing down on them both. Jake could feel the tension building, the knowledge that whatever was coming next, they couldn't face it alone. It was then that he realized, despite everything, he hadn't really known Tom at all. He didn't know the depths of the man's past, the secrets that had led him to this point, but he knew one thing for certain. Tom had kept him alive. They reached a small, unmarked door in the side of a nondescript building. Tom knocked twice, a rhythm Jake couldn't place. The door creaked open to reveal a man with a weary face and eyes that spoke of too many years spent in the shadows. "You're late," the man said, his voice gruff but not unfriendly. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in military fatigues that looked like they hadn't seen proper care in years. Tom nodded. "We need help." The man looked at Jake, then back at Tom. There was no judgment in his gaze, just the cool, practiced calm of someone who had seen far too much in his lifetime. "Come in," the man said, stepping aside. "We've got work to do." Inside was a cramped, dimly lit room, filled with old maps, files, and surveillance equipment. The air was thick with the smell of old coffee and stale papers. Jake couldn't make sense of the place, but the quiet authority in the man's presence told him he wasn't in a typical hideout. This was someone who had resources, someone who knew how to survive. "Who's this?" Jake asked, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "This is Colonel James Mason," Tom said, his voice laced with respect. "A man who owes me his life." Jake's heart skipped. This was the man Tom had saved. The pieces were starting to come together, but it was clear Jake was no longer an outsider. He was part of something much bigger, and whatever it was, he had just formed an unlikely alliance with a man who could help them survive the storm that was coming. The tension in the room grew thicker as Colonel Mason turned to face them both, his expression unreadable. He hadn't said much since they entered, but Jake could tell he was weighing something in his mind. Tom paced back and forth, his eyes flicking nervously between Mason and the door. "We don't have much time," Tom said, his voice strained. "The people after us, they'll stop at nothing." Mason's eyes hardened. "I know." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table toward Tom. "This is everything I could find, but there's more to it than we thought." Tom grabbed the folder without hesitation, flipping through it quickly. His face tightened with every page. The information was damning. Names, locations, operations, all connected to the very men who had been chasing them. But something was off. Tom's fingers froze on a particular sheet. Jake couldn't see what it was, but he could feel the change in the air. It was subtle at first, just the flicker of a hesitation in Tom's eyes, but it was enough to make his stomach churn. "Tom," Jake said, his voice edged with concern. "What's wrong?" Tom slammed the folder shut, his hand trembling. He looked up, his eyes cold, distant. "I can't do this anymore, Jake," he muttered, almost to himself. "I can't keep dragging you into this." Before Jake could respond, the door behind them slammed open. Two men in tactical gear burst into the room, guns drawn. Jake's heart stopped. They had been set up. Mason's face was unreadable as he stepped back, his hands raised in surrender. "I'm sorry, Tom," he said quietly. "I had no choice." Tom's eyes widened, the realization hitting him like a slap. "You." His voice cracked, but the word was clear. "You betrayed me?" The men behind Mason were agents, not allies. Mason had been the one feeding them information all along. The betrayal was complete, and in that moment, Tom realized how deeply the people he had trusted had already sold him out. As the agents moved forward, Jake's chest tightened. He was caught in the middle of a war he didn't understand, and now it felt like there was no escape. Jake's pulse thundered in his ears as the agents advanced, their footsteps heavy on the floor. He barely registered the sharp, metallic scent of fear in the air, the way his breath came in quick, shallow gasps. The room felt smaller with each second, the walls closing in, as if the space itself was trapping him and Tom together in a nightmare. Tom moved fast, faster than Jake had expected. With one swift motion, he grabbed a chair and hurled it toward the agents, causing them to stagger back in surprise. It wasn't much, but it bought them precious seconds. "Get out," Tom shouted, his voice raw, desperate. "Go Jake now." Jake hesitated, his mind struggling to catch up. This wasn't what he had signed up for. A week ago, he was just a pizza delivery driver. Now, he was being pulled deeper into a world of betrayal, military secrets, and chaos. But Tom wasn't giving him a choice. Not anymore. Jake didn't think twice. He ran, the sound of his own feet barely registering over the roar of adrenaline. He ducked behind an overturned table, barely avoiding a spray of gunfire from the agents. His heart was in his throat, but something in Tom's desperate urgency snapped him into focus. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about doing what was right. It was about freeing Tom from whatever hell he had been dragged into. Tom's voice rang out again, cutting through the gunfire. "I'm not leaving without you." Jake barely turned to see him standing there, his body poised like a soldier preparing for the worst. Tom had always been the one who'd sacrificed, who'd saved lives, but now it was Jake's turn to do the same. With no time to think, Jake sprinted back to Tom, grabbing his arm as they made their way toward the back door. The agents were closing in, but something had shifted between them. The unspoken promise that had lingered in the air, the promise of loyalty, of standing side by side, had finally solidified. As they burst through the back door into the cold night, Jake knew one thing for certain. They were no longer just running. They were reclaiming their freedom. Together. The night air bit at Jake's skin as he and Tom sprinted through the back alleyways, dodging the sound of pursuing footsteps that echoed like a death sentence behind them. The city, once so familiar, now felt like a maze of shadows and hidden corners. Every turn, every step, took them deeper into a world they weren't supposed to know, a world where danger was always one step ahead. Tom didn't slow down. He moved with purpose, his eyes darting back and forth, scanning every alley, every building, as if he had memorized this underground path long ago. Jake struggled to keep up, his legs burning, but there was something about the way Tom moved, so familiar with the darkness, that made him trust him implicitly. Finally, they reached a nondescript door at the end of a narrow passage. Tom knocked once, the rhythm quick and sharp. A few moments passed before the door creaked open, revealing a woman in her mid-30s, her expression guarded but not unfriendly. She stepped aside, silently gesturing for them to enter. The room beyond was a stark contrast to the gritty chaos of the streets. It was small but organized, with maps pinned to the walls, old military gear stacked in corners, and various papers scattered across a table. The air smelled faintly of old coffee and something more earthy, like damp earth. "Welcome to the underground," the woman said, her voice low but confident. "I'm Grace. We've been expecting you." Tom didn't waste time with pleasantries. "They're after us. We need to move fast." Grace nodded, her gaze shifting to Jake. "You're not one of us," she said, her tone thoughtful. "But you're in this now." Jake swallowed hard. This wasn't what he'd imagined when he first gave Tom that pizza. He hadn't expected any of this. The chase, the secrets, the betrayal. But now, standing in this hidden world, he realized there was no going back. Tom had pulled him in, and whether he liked it or not, they were in this together. The only question left was how far they were willing to go. Jake's head was spinning as he stood in the dimly lit room, the weight of everything crashing down on him. The quiet hum of the small space seemed to magnify every unanswered question, every doubt that had been growing inside him since the moment Tom had walked into his life. The hidden world, the betrayal, the relentless chase. It was all one tangled lie, woven so tightly that Jake could barely see the threads. But now, Tom had dragged him into it, and there was no turning back. Grace stepped forward, holding a folder in her hands, and placed it on the table in front of Jake. Her eyes flickered with a quiet urgency. "This is the evidence," she said, her voice steady but serious. "This is what we've been trying to expose for years." Jake swallowed, feeling the weight of the moment. "What is this?" His voice sounded foreign to him, rough with the exhaustion that had settled into his bones. Grace leaned in, her fingers tracing the edge of the folder. "These documents are proof. Proof that the operation Tom was part of was covered up. The men who've been chasing you, they're part of a much bigger machine. A machine that's been lying about its operations, sweeping everything under the rug." Tom's face was set in a hard line as he watched Grace speak, but there was something in his eyes, something that Jake couldn't quite place. The military, the government, they've all been hiding this for years. The operation Tom was in, it was supposed to save lives. But it failed, and they let it fail. And now they're erasing everyone who knows the truth. Jake stared at the documents, his mind racing. The lies were everywhere, spanning years, twisting reality, protecting people who didn't deserve protection. But now, with these papers in front of him, Jake understood. This wasn't just about Tom anymore. This was about something much bigger. About exposing a truth that had been buried for too long. Grace's gaze hardened. "We can't do this alone. We need to make sure this gets out before they silence all of us." Jake took a deep breath, his resolve settling in. The lie was out there, and it was time for the world to hear it. Jake sat in the dimly lit room, his eyes tracing the worn edges of the documents on the table. The truth was staring back at him, but it didn't feel like a revelation. It felt like a weight pressing down on his chest, making it harder to breathe. He had never imagined that a simple act of kindness would lead him to uncovering something so dark, so dangerous. The military operation, the betrayal, the lives lost, it all felt like something out of a bad movie, except this was real. And now, Jake was caught in the middle of it. Tom stood by the window, his posture rigid, his back turned to Jake as he gazed out at the city below. He hadn't said much since the documents were revealed, and Jake could feel the tension between them growing. There was a history here, one that Tom had carried for years, and it was now spilling into Jake's life. The past that Tom had tried to outrun was finally catching up to him, and to Jake. "You didn't have to bring me into this," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words felt like a confession, as if he were blaming Tom for something he couldn't control. Tom's shoulders stiffened at the sound of Jake's voice, but he didn't turn around. "I never wanted you to get involved," he replied, his voice hoarse. "But once you gave me that pizza, once you saw me, really saw me, I couldn't just walk away." Jake's heart tightened to the words. He had wanted to help, to do something good for someone who had nothing, but he hadn't known it would come with such a price. "I don't know how to fix this, Tom," Jake admitted, his hands trembling slightly. Tom finally turned, his eyes meeting Jake's for the first time since they had entered the room. There was something unspoken there, something heavy. "You don't have to fix it," he said, his voice soft. "You just have to stand by me." Jake swallowed, the weight of his decision sinking in. He had already crossed a line, and now there was no turning back. He wasn't just standing beside Tom anymore. He was standing with him, against the truth they both feared to face. And together, they would make sure it was heard. The silence between them stretched longer than Jake could handle, heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. Tom's words echoed in Jake's mind. "You don't have to fix it. You just have to stand by me." And now, more than ever, Jake understood what that meant. Standing by Tom wasn't just about facing down the men who were hunting them. It was about facing the life Tom had lost, the one that had been stolen from him long before their paths had crossed. Tom had been a soldier, a hero, but he didn't look like one now. He looked like a man who had been broken and cast aside by a system that didn't care. The medals, the praise, those had all been buried under the weight of years of neglect and betrayal. The man who had saved lives, who had risked everything for his country, was now nothing more than a shadow, running from a past that refused to let him go. Jake glanced at the documents on the table again, his stomach churning as he absorbed the enormity of it all. The operation had been a disaster. People had died, and the higher-ups had covered it up, silencing everyone who knew the truth. Tom had tried to expose it, tried to do the right thing, but in the end, it was his life that had been stolen, not just by the people he had served, but by a government that had promised to protect him and then abandoned him when he needed it most. Jake's eyes found Tom, still standing near the window, his figure silhouetted against the dim light. Tom wasn't just a victim of the system. He was a symbol of everything that had gone wrong, the men who had been forgotten, the sacrifices that had been erased. Jake could see it in his eyes now, the toll of carrying a life that wasn't his to bear anymore. Tom's voice broke the stillness, soft and distant. "I had a family once, a life, before all of this, before they took it." Jake's throat tightened. He hadn't known the full extent of Tom's loss. But now, standing in this room, surrounded by secrets and lies, he understood. It wasn't just Tom's past that had been stolen. It was everything he had ever been. And Jake couldn't help but wonder if he could ever help Tom get it back. The truth felt like a chain around Jake's chest, heavy and unrelenting. Every step he took seemed to pull him deeper into a world he hadn't asked to be part of. And yet, here he was, standing at the edge of something that had been set in motion long before he'd met Tom. The pieces were scattered, the lies stretching out in every direction, and all he could do was keep moving forward. Tom had become a symbol of everything Jake feared, a man trapped in the grip of a past he couldn't escape. But now, as Jake looked at him standing by the window, his face hard and set in that same determined line, Jake realized that Tom wasn't just running. He was fighting. And for the first time, Jake understood what it meant to truly stand by someone. "Tomorrow," Tom said, breaking the silence, his voice low. "Tomorrow we go public. It's the only way to make them listen." Jake's throat tightened at the words. Going public meant exposing everything. The truth about the operation, the betrayal, and the powerful forces that wanted to keep it all buried. It meant risking everything. But if they didn't act now, they would be silenced like so many others who had come before them. "Are you ready?" Tom asked, his gaze turning to Jake, searching for something in his eyes. Jake swallowed, the weight of the question pressing down on him. Could he do this? Could he face the consequences of all this, knowing that once they exposed the truth, there would be no going back? "I'm ready," Jake said, his voice steady, though the uncertainty lingered beneath the surface. Tom nodded, the corner of his mouth twitching upward in a ghost of a smile. "We break the chain tomorrow. We stop running." Jake felt a surge of something deeper than fear. It was resolve, a quiet but powerful understanding that no matter what happened next, they would face it together. No more hiding, no more running. They would expose the lie, and in doing so, they would shatter the chain that had kept them both bound to the past. As the night stretched on, Jake could only wonder how many lives had been broken by the same chain. But now, it was time to break it for good. The day of reckoning had come, and Jake felt the weight of it like an anchor around his chest. The streets outside were still, the city holding its breath, waiting for something to break. He could feel the storm gathering, the calm before the chaos. The decision to go public was no longer just an idea. It was their only shot at making things right. The files, the proof, everything they needed to expose the truth was in their hands now. But so were the consequences. Tom stood in the center of the room, his back straight, eyes scanning the room as if he were preparing for battle. Jake could see the tension in his posture, the same way a soldier would brace for the inevitable. But Tom's eyes had changed. There was no fear in them now, just a cold resolve. He wasn't running anymore. He was ready to face whatever came next, even if it meant sacrificing himself. "You sure about this?" Jake asked, his voice quiet but full of weight. "Once we do this, there's no going back." Tom didn't hesitate. "There's nothing left for me to go back to." The words hit Jake harder than he expected. They weren't just about Tom's past. They were about everything they were fighting for now. They had come too far to stop, and Jake knew that even if the world came crashing down around them, they couldn't let the lie stand. Not anymore. They moved swiftly, the final preparations taking shape as the clock ticked down. It was time. Grace had set up everything they needed, an untraceable online post, the documents ready to be shared with the world. Tom's life, the lives of so many others, were about to be exposed for what they truly were. Heroes betrayed, forgotten by the very system they had served. The door to the room suddenly creaked open, and Jake's heart skipped a beat. But it wasn't the men they had been expecting. It was Grace, her eyes wide with urgency. "They're here," she whispered, her voice tight. "It's too late to back out now." Jake glanced at Tom, who nodded once. It was time to make their final stand. And this time, there would be no running. The walls of the small room felt like they were closing in as Jake and Tom stood side by side, the weight of the world pressing down on them. Grace was at the computer, her fingers flying over the keyboard, finalizing the post that would expose the truth to the world. Every second felt like an eternity. Outside, the city continued as if unaware of the storm that was about to break. But for Jake, there was no going back now. Tom had been right. There was no life for him before this. There was only the fight for truth, for redemption, for the men and women who had been forgotten, for the soldiers who had given everything, only to be erased from history. And now, with their hands on the button that would send the world into chaos, Jake couldn't help but wonder if they were truly ready for what was coming. Grace hit send, and for a moment there was nothing. The silence in the room stretched, and Jake felt his heart stop. The world held its breath, the lie teetering on the edge of exposure. Then the screen flashed. The post had gone live. The storm was here. The chain had been broken, but it didn't feel like victory. Not yet. Tom's eyes never left the screen. He was watching, waiting for the inevitable. They had known the risks, the price they would have to pay for doing the right thing. But now, with the truth out there, Jake couldn't help but feel the enormity of it. There was no turning back. The door slammed open, and they both turned in unison. The men had arrived, those who would silence them for good. But this time, there was no fear in Tom's eyes, no hesitation. The time for running was over. Jake's hand tightened on the gun in his belt. The price had already been paid, and now it was time to face the consequences. The truth had been set free, but at what cost? Tom met Jake's gaze, his expression resolute. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "we did the right thing." The door was about to open wide, and the world would never be the same again. Neither would they. The gunfire had faded, replaced by a stillness that hung in the air like smoke after a storm. Jake's chest was tight, his breath shallow, but the weight of the moment was different now. The battle was over, and the truth had been revealed. The world was waking up to the lies that had been buried for so long. But for Jake and Tom, the price had been paid. Tom stood near the window, his silhouette outlined by the pale light of the rising sun. The city was quiet, the hum of life returning to normal, unaware of the changes that had unfolded in the shadows. For Tom, the battle had always been about more than survival. It had been about redemption. And in the silence of the room, as the dust settled, Jake saw something in him that had been absent for so long. Peace. "Are we safe now?" Jake asked, his voice hoarse but filled with a kind of fragile hope. Tom didn't answer immediately. He just stared out the window, his mind somewhere far away, in a place Jake could never reach. But when he spoke, his voice was steady, calm in a way Jake hadn't heard before. "We're as safe as we're ever going to be," Tom said. "But safety doesn't matter anymore. The truth is out there, and that's all that matters now." Jake nodded, feeling the weight of those words settle in his chest. For the first time, he realized that Tom wasn't just fighting for the past, for the memories of things that couldn't be changed. He was fighting for the future, the one that hadn't been stolen from him, the one that he could still shape. As the sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden light over the city, Jake understood that a new beginning was possible. Not just for Tom, but for both of them. They had survived. They had fought for something real, something pure. And now it was time to rebuild. They had no more secrets, no more chains. They had nothing but each other and the road ahead. And for the first time, that was enough.